Well, thanks very much for having me again today. I always enjoy coming to the bloggers briefing and meeting a lot of familiar faces and some new people. My name is Joe Henchman. I'm the Director of State Projects at the Tax Foundation. If you don't know about us, we were formed in 1937 for the purpose of informing Americans about sound tax policy. We're one of the oldest nonpartisan organizations and one of the oldest think tanks in the country, and we're dedicated to fighting for the principles of sound tax policy at all levels of government. Tax Freedom Day is one of our most well-known products. We've done it for nearly 40 years each year calculating the day of the year which Americans have earned enough to pay their taxes and can start working for themselves. Until Tax Freedom Day, everything that everyone earns, everything that the Americans on average earn in the country goes to finance the cost of federal, state, and local governments. No other measure captures the ups and downs of the American tax burden as simply as this date over time. This year, Americans will work 99 days into the year to pay for their tax obligation. This means the Tax Freedom Day for 2010 will fall on April 9th. Now, this year's Tax Freedom Day is one of the earliest in years because of the slumping economy, which has depressed tax collections everywhere. It's in stark contrast to the year 2000, when America's tax burden reached its highest level ever on May 1st, or 121 days into the year. That, of course, was a result of the booming economy and the tech bubble, which flooded state and federal coffers with record levels of tax payments. Now, it may seem quaint today, but when Dallas Hostetler developed Tax Freedom Day in 1948, it actually approximated the true cost of government. The government was actually running a budget surplus that year in 1948. Times have certainly changed. The past 2 years have seen the biggest deficits since World War II, and so the nation's tax burden will only cover about 60% of what government is actually spending this year. To many Americans, the cost of government seems cheaper than it really is because of this. If we increase taxes to pay for all of the government services Americans are getting today, the true cost of Government Day would not fall until May 17th. That's an additional 38 days to pay for the deficit.
Tax Freedom Day is April 9th, and according to the information I've seen from the Tax Foundation, about 27% of income is being used up for this purpose by paying taxes. But that doesn't seem to be the largest percentage that's been in history. It looks back like during the Reagan years and even the Bush years it was higher. Why is that the case?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. The main one being that because of the economy, tax collections have dropped faster than income has. To put it mathematically, the numerator has been falling differently from the denominator. So we're seeing a drop in tax collections. We'll also have a record high deficit this year, so there's a lot of spending that's going on that's not being paid for by taxes. In fact, if you were to include the deficit in Tax Freedom Day, it would be May 17th, another more than 38 days, all the way up until May. So those are the main reasons why it seems to be earlier this year, but it's just a forerunning for it starting to rise again soon.
By historical standards from the Tax Foundation standpoint, how has this year's tax day compared to others in general?
Well, it's one of the earliest since the end of World War II, for those reasons that I've put. But it's important to remember that after World War II, in 1948, which was the first year Tax Freedom Day was actually calculated, that year the government ran a budget surplus, the federal government did. So for this year, when we have such a large budget deficit, it's not directly comparable to what it was in 1948. So I imagine we're going to be seeing Tax Freedom Day start to rise again, especially now that we're seeing the expiration of the Bush tax cuts and the new health care bill being passed.
Speaking about the health care bill, there are lots of taxes that are put into that program in that bill. How is that going to affect things going forward? Do you expect to see a large jump in the Tax Freedom Day, or will it just kind of gradually grow?
Well, the taxes in the health care bill, a lot of them are phased in over a period of time. Some do take effect this year. If you include them, unfortunately the bill was enacted after our press time, but if you were to include them, it would be another 2 to 3 days. And that will rise each year as more and more of the taxes take effect. The last one being the tax on high insurance plans in 2018.
What seems to constitute the largest percentage of the tax burden in Tax Freedom Day?
Well, in our Tax Freedom Day report, which you can look at taxfoundation.org/taxfreedomday, we divide it up by not only federal and state, but also by the different types of taxes. Federal taxes are the largest component, about twice as much as the state taxes. And then income tax is the largest share of the combined taxes, followed by payroll taxes and then sales and excise taxes. So things like the state sales taxes as well as the federal excise taxes on gasoline and cigarettes.
So if I read the report correctly, so Alaska was the earliest one to have Tax Freedom Day this year.
Right.
What has happened there compared to, say, Connecticut?
Sure. Connecticut having the last Tax Freedom Day at the end of April. Tax Freedom Day is a combination of federal and state and local taxes. So the components would be both high state and local tax burdens relative to each other. Of course, Alaska has a very low tax burden compared to Connecticut's state tax burden, but also the share of federal income taxes. We have a very progressive system federally, so high-income earners pay more, and Connecticut has more high-income earners than Alaska does. So we see a lot of the New England states, as well as like Virginia, which has a lot of high-income people, being very high on Tax Freedom Day, regardless of their state local tax burden. We're going to be coming out with a new report at the end of spring, which takes out federal and focuses just on the state local tax burden.
Now, thanks to this recession, or due to the recession, the states are under tremendous budget pressure. Do you see that as a factor going forward, that they will try to raise taxes and that will then push this Tax Freedom Day for some states? That'll
be a big thing on the agenda during 2010. Historically, state revenues have only recovered after the general economic recovery. A lot of economists are saying that the economy exited recession at the end of 2009, but even if that's the case, we're not going to see that hitting state budgets until about 2011. So through the rest of this year, we're going to continue to see states being over-optimistic about their revenue projections, setting spending levels at that level, and then seeing these mid-year budget gaps open up that they then have to close. I think the rhetoric of, well, we've cut all the spending we need and now we have to do tax increases will be very seductive, and we're going to hear that line in a lot of states. About half a dozen states did raise either income or sales taxes during 2009. We expect 2010 will exceed that number.